A city in shock and full of questions as 3 are killed in a dawn attack in Nottingham. 2 students aged just 19 were stabbed to death by a knifeman as they walked home. Another man killed in a street nearby.
This is a very sad day for our city, and we will do everything possible to get justice for the victims and their families.
I am desperately sad for our universities and for many of the young people who bring so much to Nottingham.
A man's been arrested and police say they are not looking for anyone else, but there are very many questions tonight. We'll get the latest from Ben and Paul at the scene. Also on News at 10 tonight. Donald Trump pleads not guilty in the classified documents case as hundreds of his supporters gather at court. Dan is there.
Tony Moore, Maria O'Keefe.
A roll call of grief and pain, the names of those lost as the COVID inquiry begins.
Even at this stage, before hearing the evidence, it is apparent that we might not have been very well prepared at all.
Why the Partygate report may be delayed after a late intervention by Boris Johnson, and by order of the Peaky Blinders, how the legendary show could help Birmingham hit the big time.
I know the qualities of Birmingham people, and what we need to do is not tell people what it's like, but to show people.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. As the City of Nottingham tries to make sense of today's events when the dawn streets were filled with sirens and locked down, the question above all others is why? Why were 3 people, 2 of them university students, stabbed to death? Why were 3 others driven at by the stolen van of one of the victims? Questions police will surely be asking a 31-year-old man arrested on suspicion of murder. One of the young victims, tonight named as Barnaby Webber, was described as a funny, kind man who was walking home from a night out when he was seemingly randomly attacked. Detectives are keeping an open mind on the motive. Their investigation assisted but not currently led by counter-terror police.
In the middle of the road, discarded paramedics' equipment marks the place where a terrifying few hours began. The place where 2 university students were stabbed to death while coming home from a night out. One of them was Barnaby Webber, 19 years old, and described by one of his friends as kind, friendly, and really good fun.
This is a very sad day for our city, and we will do everything possible to get justice for the victims and their families. We are keeping an open mind and are working closely with counter-terrorism policing to establish the facts. My thoughts are with all the families affected by this horrific incident, and we are working extremely hard to try and understand exactly what has happened.
When people woke up here this morning, they found great swathes of their city locked down as the sequence of horrifying events in the early hours began to emerge. Police were called to Ilkeston Road just after 4 a.m, where 2 19-year-olds were found stabbed and unresponsive. A man was also found dead on Magdala Road. It's believed the suspect then stole that man's van and drove it at members of the public in Milton Street, injuring 3 people. Police then found the van and arrested a 31-year-old man on Maple Street. One of those hit by the van in the city centre remains in a critical condition.
I just crossed the road and all of a sudden I heard a bang.
Frances was on her way to work and rushed to help.
We saw the male had head injuries, so the police stopped and was helping him, and then there was a lady on the ground, so I just helped her.
The van, with its front end dented and its windscreen smashed, ended its journey in a residential street. The residents woken by a man being tasered before being arrested. By lunchtime, armed police were carrying out raids.
This is very scary.
Those who'd broken into this house were counter-terrorist specialist firearms officers.
This raid has been taken place not far from where the police cordoned off the road after those 2 people were found dead at 4 o'clock this morning. It is just a couple of hundred yards to where armed police have gone into this house.
Officers have reassured people here they're not looking for anyone else. As people came together this evening to remember the victims. Students among those leaving flowers at a vigil.
It was hard throughout the day as the news kind of broke more to sort of start to recognise the names and the places and stuff that we all know so well, and it obviously makes it such a real thing and such an upsetting situation as the details clarified as well.
Nottingham's bishop spoke of the city's trauma.
All loss of life is tragic. I think students make an enormous contribution to this city and our universities, and I am desperately sad for our universities and for many of the young people who bring so much to Nottingham. And I think today we grieve with them.
But this is a city and a community desperate for answers, not least to why this happened. A day of tragedy with no conceivable explanation. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Nottingham.
Well, we can speak to our UK editor, Paul, who's been in Nottingham all today too. Paul, what have you gleaned from what the police have had to say so far?
Well, Julie, there were relatively few new details in the statement that they gave to camera earlier this evening, which you saw there in Ben's report. What it did contain, though, was some reassurance for the people of Nottingham. Police are adamant that the only suspect here is the one man that they have in custody, and they believe that Nottingham city centre is perfectly safe now to return to. The more vivid details that we're getting to us tonight concern the 3 people who have died, in particular Barnaby Webber, who you heard about there in Ben's report. His cricket club have paid tribute to him this evening too, saying he was a dear friend and teammate. And we're told by other friends of Barnaby that he was walking home from a night out in the city centre when he was attacked outside of his student accommodation. Nottingham is a city with a greater proportion of student accommodation than almost any other city in the United Kingdom. 65,000 students in total. This city thrives on its 2 universities, and we have seen for ourselves tonight just how shocked many of those students are. What they don't know, what the police don't know yet, is the motive for all of this. The police don't seem to be concluding that this has anything to do with terrorism, but they say they are keeping an open mind. You would need one to understand why anyone would do this.
Indeed. OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed for that. To events in the United States now, and where Donald Trump wants to be, of course, is back in the White House. Where he found himself today was a Miami courtroom, his second such appearance in a matter of months. As expected, he denied charges over alleged mishandling of classified documents before sweeping away in his giant convoy past chaotic scenes outside. Where the story goes next could shape the political landscape in America for years. The possibility of a jail cell or the Oval Office, competing realities for the Republican frontrunner.
President Trump has got used to the trappings of power, but today as he headed towards court, waving briefly at his supporters, he was about to be treated just like anybody else. His motorcade swept into the court complex in downtown Miami, where he was about to be arrested, fingerprinted and formally charged with 37 counts of taking and hiding classified documents.
Happy Pro-Life Month! How'd that Roe v. Wade work out for you?
Outside, a few hundred supporters and some detractors exchanged views.
Trump lost me.
The gravity of those charges was apparently lost on those who would class themselves as true believers in brand Trump.
This is their tactics to beat Donald Trump. They know they can't beat him at the voter box, so they're going to try to beat him with lawsuits.
And you don't believe any of it?
No. He was the president of the United States. He could take any documents he wanted.
This is the worst thing in American history since probably President Lincoln and Kennedy being assassanated.
Everyone in the world will see how corrupt this court is.
There were many vocal loyalists here, but none more so than Carrie Lake, who darkly warned 75 million Trump supporters, many of whom are armed, would stand in the way of any prosecution.
When Trump wins and gets back in office, we're going to make America great again.
And you said that people will have to go through 75 million of his supporters. Do you stand by that?
Well, look at the love here. Look at the love here. People love President Trump. And it's probably more like 300 million.
But the promise that tens of thousands of Trump supporters would show up turned out to be hollow, the police not needing the reinforcements they'd put on standby. As President Trump entered a not guilty plea, one of his lawyers lambasted the process.
The people in charge of this country do not love America. They have been quietly but aggressively cultivating a two-tiered system of justice where selective treatment is the norm.
As Donald Trump left, his motorcade was temporarily delayed by a protester who rushed his vehicle. But in the months ahead, the real drama of this case will play out in court as the litany of damning evidence is presented against a man who still seeks to lead this country again. Before flying out, he stopped in Miami's Little Havana, greeted like a hero by the Cuban community. The message was clear: Trump's campaign goes on.
And Dan is outside that court in Miami where Mr. Trump appeared earlier, and context is key to all of this, and potent indeed, isn't it, Dan? The case is one of several and set against the timetable of the next election.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to drag on for many months, I'm afraid, Julie. But some new details just emerging in the last few minutes from people who were in the court watching what happened. Donald Trump sat with a scowl on his face, his arms crossed throughout the proceedings. It was his lawyer that put in that not guilty plea rather than Donald Trump himself, which was interesting. Also, he was sitting just a few feet away from Jack Smith, the man who's leading this prosecution, a man that he had labelled a thug on social media just a few hours before. So slightly awkward. No travel restrictions were put on him per se, but he was told not to discuss the case with his personal aide and valet, Walt Nauta, who is also accused in this case. Now, at the moment, he is flying to New Jersey. We've just had pictures of the plane taking off. He's due to address supporters and the press there. But there will be many more months now of legal wrangling about the timetable of this case. What is critical in all this is whether Team Trump can somehow manage to postpone this until after the election in 2024.
OK, Dan, thank you very much. Now, if for any one time had faded memories of the worst of the pandemic, they came flooding back today as some of those who lost loved ones spoke with raw emotion at the start of the UK's COVID inquiry. In a pre-recorded film, they told of the guilt of not being able to comfort their dying relatives, the loneliness of grieving in isolation, and the anger at the questions unanswered, questions the inquiry hopes to address. Well, it's expected to run until at least 2026. 135 core participants are being represented, including bereaved families, the NHS and government departments. Its remit is huge, so to make it more manageable, it's broken down into modules, including political decisions, government procurement like the supply of PPE and vaccines. The cost is expected to exceed £100 million. Families hope that it will be money well spent.
Tony Moore, Maria O'Keefe, Wally Hayes, Samuel Patterson.
Outside the COVID inquiry, a reminder of why it's being held. The names of some of the 227,000 who lost their lives in the pandemic, read out in front of the families still grieving them. The bereaved clear this inquiry must count.
Paul Hart.
I'm here to learn what was their level of preparedness.
It's about saving lives, it's about stopping this from happening in the future.
I'd like to know that the country will be prepared, that they will learn from the mistakes that were made.
Some of the bereaved have been concerned their voices are not being heard loudly enough here. Outside, the inquiry's barrister and inside its chair tried to reassure them.
It is on their behalf and on behalf of the millions who suffered and continue to suffer in different ways as a result of the pandemic, that I intend to answer the following 3 questions. Was the UK properly prepared for a pandemic? Was the response to it appropriate? And can we learn lessons for the future?
I got a phone call to say Mum wasn't going to make it. I asked, could any of us be there? And they said no.
Day one opened with powerful testimony of how much was lost.
I'm just still hurt and I'm still upset. And it's been a couple of years now and we're still upset. And it's not going to go away just like that.
We were courting for 6 years and married for 48. And so this affected me a lot. Greatly, I'm on my own now.
The first section of the 3-year inquiry will look at how prepared the UK was for a pandemic, in the words of the inquiry's barrister.
Even at this stage, before hearing the evidence, it is apparent that we might not have been very well prepared at all.
Not only that, he suggested preparing for a no-deal Brexit made the situation worse. Some of those watching outside felt it confirmed their fears.
Today we heard some real truths which shows how the country was not prepared for this pandemic whatsoever. And they didn't heed the warnings.
Families and the inquiry chair united in a determination to make sure that cannot happen again. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
Well, the day will come, of course, when Boris Johnson faces the COVID inquiry. For now, his attention is on seemingly the perpetual back and forth between himself, Number 10, and the committee investigating whether he lied to MPs over Partygate. With its report already delayed, the committee said it's now dealing with 11th-hour submissions from the former PM, who tonight issued another enraged statement attacking them. Well, Robert joins me now. I mean, to say it's got a bit messy in the last 24 hours is an understatement, isn't it?
Well, I mean, some would say if it's Boris Johnson, it's bound to be messy. He sent a last-minute submission at 3 minutes before midnight on Monday. He was a journalist in the old days, you may remember, famous for pushing deadlines to the minute. Nothing terribly surprising about all of this. It appears, according to those who know about his submission, to be another "it's all terribly unfair, it's an establishment stitch-up" sort of rant. We've heard that from many of his colleagues. It's not the only reason the report, which we thought would be out tomorrow, has been delayed. There are other various technical issues to do with it. Probably we'll now get it on Tuesday. I don't think this submission, I think he expects his submission to have any material effect on the content, which will show, as we've been saying for some time, or which will rule, shall we say, as we've been saying for some time, that in many respects, what he said to Parliament, whether it was about there were no rules broken in Downing Street, whether it was about there were no parties in Downing Street, these were, in the committee's view, reckless, willful lies. That's a heinous offence when it comes to minister. We've certainly never seen anything like this from a serving Prime Minister. The next big issue, when it's published, is what kind of censure Parliament, the whole House, will put on it. This is a complicated issue. It's all to do actually with the future of Boris Johnson. Will he ever come back again? If people want more information, they can read my blog.
OK, and to be clear, you think Thursday? I think you mentioned Tuesday.
What did I say, Tuesday?
Yeah,
I meant Thursday.
Thursday
Tuesday,
we're looking
so
at,
I must mean Thursday.
Yeah, must mean Thursday. Thank you very much indeed, Robert, for that. In other news tonight, a mother and her partner have been convicted of killing her 9-year-old son, who was subjected to repeated cruel abuse. Alfie Steele had 50 injuries across his body when he was found unresponsive in a bath at his home in Worcestershire in February 2021. For months, neighbours had called police to raise concerns. 41-year-old Dirk Howell was found guilty of his murder, and his mother, Carla Scott, 35, was guilty of manslaughter. Now, it was announced today that excluding during the pandemic, pay is rising faster than it has been in 2 decades. And as the country struggles with the cost of living crisis, that might sound like a rare bit of good news. The other side of all those coins, though, is the fear that wage increases are fueling inflation. And so to continue countering that, the expectation is that the Bank of England will have to raise interest rates next week again.
Higher interest rates are supposed to be cooling the economy, but pay growth is hotting up. This Thai restaurant first raised prices to cover the surge in its energy bills. Then it raised prices again to fund higher pay for staff. Here in West London, inflation has fed itself.
The pressures at the moment are intense. There is already a lack of staff to work in the hospitality industry at this moment in time. If we didn't encourage the staff to work for us and to give them a decent wage and to give wage increases, then we would close.
Regular pay in the UK grew by 7.2% in the 3 months to April, the fastest growth for 20 years. But the Bank of England has previously indicated that pay growth above 3% will make it much harder to bring inflation back down under control. Pay growth is strong enough to worry the bank, but not quite strong enough to prevent living standards from falling. Real pay, adjusted for inflation, fell by 1.3% in the 3 months to April. The bank has already increased interest rates to 4.5% in the last 18 months. Investors are now betting bank rate will reach 5.5% by the end of this year and remain at that level until next summer. Higher interest rates are designed to prevent pay and prices from spiralling upwards together by suppressing demand for labour. And yet pay growth is accelerating again. Clearly, an increase in the national minimum wage in April helps to explain why, but it's not the whole story. Pay growth across the economy looks strong.
I'm afraid this is bad news for the bank.
Sushil Wadhwani used to set interest rates. He concedes the full impact of the increases we've had has yet to be felt, but insists the Bank of England cannot afford to pause.
I think we have to keep taking the medicine and risk a mild recession. If we stop taking the medicine, we sadly risk a much worse recession. We have no choice but to bring inflation down.
As investors bet on further interest rate rises, the Governor of the Bank of England said inflation was taking a lot longer to come down than hoped. Andrew Bailey said a shortage of workers in the UK is a key factor.
One of the things that firms pretty much universally say to me, and have been saying to me for a little while, is that they find it so hard to recruit labour in the current market that they are not going to release labour. There's labour hoarding going on.
Banks and building societies continue to make it more expensive to borrow money, but the markets aren't always right. The international price of food and energy has fallen. Inflation here could tumble. Anyone with a mortgage will be hoping that's exactly what happens next. Joel Hills, News at 10.
Now, while the jailing of a mother of 3 for using abortion tablets to end her pregnancy after the legal limit has sparked anger and concern from some, it won't be prompting action from the government. Rishi Sunak's spokesman said there are no plans for reform, saying current laws provide the right balance. Carla Foster was jailed for more than 2 years under legislation from 1861 because she was between 32 and 34 weeks pregnant when she took the medication. Abortion is legal up to 24 weeks. Conservative MP Caroline Noakes said the law needs updating.
We need to debate this properly in the round. We've amended abortion legislation, we've tinkered on the edges. What we haven't done is discuss the reality of 21st century Britain, which is very different to 1861 when this legislation was passed.
Now, whether it's sneezing, itchy eyes or a runny nose or all three, anyone suffering from hay fever knows just how infuriating it can be. It's particularly bad at the moment, with the number of people seeking advice on it tripling in recent weeks. So just why is it bad, so bad right now? Martin is here to explain, hopefully with no sneezes in between, Martin.
No, I mean, Julie, if you're one of the 18 million people who have got hay fever in this country, I think today's story won't really come as any great shock, because more than 122,000 people have been on the NHS website to get advice about the pollen allergy in the past week. That is at the rate of 1 every 3 seconds on Sunday. It is fair to say people are suffering.
Yeah, it's definitely been one of the worst years. I had it, it went away and came back this year.
Itchy eyes, you want to rub your eyes and then you can't see.
I didn't used to have it at all, so it's gradually increased as I've got older, but I don't know if that's me or whether that's the world.
So is there something going on in the world, or is this just a blip? Well, scientists say global warming is playing a part. We're seeing peak pollen season start much earlier in March and now continue through until September. And there are forecasts the season could become 60% more severe as a direct result of climate change.
With warmer temperatures, with increased carbon dioxide, the pollen grains themselves are probably richer in the allergenic proteins that actually cause the allergy. So I think that's probably the reason why things may have been seeming to get worse in recent years. And we would project them to go on getting worse in the coming years.
There's one more thing to add to the mix: toxic gases. Now, air pollution, as you can see in this map, the warmer the colour, the worse it is, at the moment is between moderate and high across much of the UK. And gases like sulphur dioxide, carbon dioxide and ozone can not only make those allergenic proteins we just heard about richer, but gases can also irritate our respiratory system, making us more susceptible in the first place. And actually, pharmacists we've been speaking to today have backed this up. They're seeing not just more patients, Julie, but more severe symptoms as well. So the advice is, obviously, you can take medication, but mitigation helps too. So stay indoors, stay hydrated, and if it is hydration, soft drinks, not alcohol, because that's got histamine and can make hay fever even worse.
OK, advice heeded. Thank you very much indeed, Martin, for that. The Pulitzer Prize-winning author Cormac McCarthy, whose Western tales and post-apocalyptic creations gripped fans, has died at the age of 89. His book, No Country for Old Men, was adapted into the Oscar-winning film, as was the dystopian novel The Road. His works date back to 1965, but it was in the 90s that he found true acclaim with the Border trilogy. And finally, the cultural influence of TV's Peaky Blinders and its notorious Shelby family are hard to miss, be it cocktail menus, haircuts or, of course, flat caps. Set on the streets of Birmingham, it gave the city a new swagger. Creator Stephen Knight's latest brainchild is a multi-million-pound studio to galvanise production in the region. A film of the show, just one project he hopes will nurture local talent and put the city of 1,000 trades on the media map. Playing, of course, an absolute blinder.
He's the man who brought us this. And now he's got this.
We're going to invite the best filmmakers and television makers from the world to come and use spaces like this. You'd build Tommy's office there.
First production in the new Digbeth Lock Studios is Peaky Blinders the movie, but its creator says that's just the start.
Peaky has certainly helped give Birmingham an identity in terms of media, and what I've wanted to do is use that as a catalyst to not just do Peaky, but to do what comes next and what comes after that, and to portray the city in content, but also for people when they're considering a place to make stuff, no matter where it's set, that they consider coming here.
Another project here is a TV series based around the ska movement in the Midlands, which produced bands like The Specials. It's time, says Knight, to show the region off.
What we are is different, and I know the qualities of Birmingham people, and what we need to do is not tell people what it's like, but to show people what it's like, and that's what we're going to do.
I'm looking for a boy!
This Brummie son of a blacksmith already has an extensive CV. He wrote the recent TV adaptation of Great Expectations. He was also the co-creator of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He has the clout to bring in productions to this vast 18-acre site of disused warehouses near Birmingham city centre. This old Victorian banana factory.
Well, this is going to be the new home of MasterChef.
Destined for a state-of-the-art studio.
And action!
With more than 700 new jobs expected, the aim is to give local students like these the chance to work in their city.
There are so many creators here, and it can be a lot to sort of have to go down to the south or just somewhere that's out of the Midlands.
Can you see yourselves going and working there after you finish it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. We've had the opportunity.
Knight can't yet say if production on the new Star Wars film, for which he's written the screenplay, will also land in Brum, but you wouldn't bet against him.
So everybody gets the vision, so we've had nothing but help.
Watch out, Hollywood.
Absolutely.
Nina Nannar, News at 10 in Digbeth in Birmingham.
Wonderful, that's it. Good night, we'll see you tomorrow.
Just a warning, you don't get an easy ride on this programme.
You're a brilliant journalist, a bit brutal with a man who was feeling very under the weather.
Really? Susanna's job is to pull the feet of the principal to the fire.
Susanna, you ask the questions that a lot of us won't do.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Good Morning Britain, weekdays from 6.